I sold my home to help my children, and 6 months later, I had nowhere that was truly mine. If you've ever given more than you should have, you may want to stay. I thought I was doing the right thing. That's the truth of it. They didn't force me. They didn't take anything I didn't offer with my own two hands. They said it would make things easier, temporary, just until things settled. And I believed them. Not because they convinced me, but because I wanted to believe that love worked that way. I had lived in that house for over 40 years, paid it off beside a good man who's been gone a long time now. Every wall had a memory in it. Every drawer held a version of my life I could still touch. But I told myself memories don't keep children afloat. Money does, support does, sacrifice does. I didn't realize I was trading the one thing that kept me steady for something that had no promise of coming back. I wasn't always alone, you know. There was a time my house was loud. Breakfasts, slammed doors, laughter that carried from one room to the next. I raised my children in that kind of home. Not perfect, but steady. I was the one who made sure things held together. After my husband passed, I stayed in that house. Learned how to manage everything on my own. Bills, repairs, quiet evenings. I told myself I was strong, independent, and I was. But I was also still a mother, and that part never quiets down. So when they started struggling, I stepped in. First it was small, a little help here, a bill there, then bigger things, a loan that turned into a gift, a gap I kept filling, and then one day, it became clear they needed more than I had sitting in savings. They needed something substantial. And I had it. The house. It felt like a clean solution at the time. Sell it, free up the money, help both of them get stable. I wouldn't need all that space anyway, I told myself. I could stay with my daughter for a while. Maybe my son after that. Family takes care of each other. That's what I believed. And for a little while, it almost looked like I was right. But small things started shifting, quietly. At first, it was just little adjustments. A drawer that wasn't really mine. A schedule that wasn't built around me. Meals happening when it worked for them. I told myself that was normal. I was a guest after all. Then it became something else. They stopped asking what I needed, not out of cruelty, just out of habit. Their lives had momentum, and I was trying to fit into it instead of standing in my own. They started making decisions and informing me after. We thought it would be better if it just makes more sense to, and I would nod. Because what was I going to say? I had given up my place at the table when I gave up my house. I just didn't understand that yet. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and I noticed something I couldn't ignore anymore. I wasn't part of the structure of their lives. I was an addition, something that could be adjusted, moved, accommodated, or not. If you're still here, I think you already know why. One afternoon, I asked a simple question. I said, "How long do you think I'll stay here before I find something of my own?" I asked it gently, not demanding, just wondering out loud. And my daughter looked at me in a way I hadn't seen before. Not cold, not angry, just practical. She said, "Mom, I don't think that's realistic right now." That was the moment something inside me went very still. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I just sat there, realizing I had already crossed a line I didn't know how to come back from. Because the truth was, I couldn't afford something of my own anymore, not without the house, not without what I had already given away. And that's when it settled in. I wasn't staying with them because I wanted to. I was staying because I had to. That kind of dependence, it changes the air around you. You start measuring your presence, your needs, your voice. You don't want to be difficult. You don't want to be a burden. So you make yourself smaller, quieter, easier to carry. But here's the part that hurt the most. They didn't see it, not fully, because from their side, everything made sense. They had responsibilities, pressure, lives that didn't stop just because I needed stability, and I had given them the very thing that would have protected mine. I remember one night in particular. I was lying in a bed that wasn't mine, in a room that held none of my history, listening to a house that didn't recognize me, and I thought, I don't belong anywhere anymore. Not because they didn't love me, but because I had nowhere that was unquestionably mine. That was the bottom. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet understanding that I had traded my independence for closeness, and lost both in the process. It took me time to see it clearly. What I thought was love was also fear. Fear that if I didn't give, I wouldn't be needed. Fear that my role as a mother would fade if I stopped providing. So I gave the biggest thing I had, and in doing that, I removed the only thing that gave me choice. Now I see it differently. Love doesn't require you to dismantle your own life. Support doesn't mean surrender, and helping your children should never come at the cost of your own foundation. I'm not angry at them. I'm not even angry at myself anymore. But I do understand something now, in a way I wish I had understood sooner. When you give away your last place of safety, you don't just lose a house, you lose your position in your own life. And rebuilding that, at my age, well, that's a quiet kind of hard. So if you're standing where I once stood, thinking about giving everything because it feels like love, just pause. Make sure you're not handing over the very thing you'll need when no one else can carry you. Because love can survive boundaries. But independence, once it's gone, doesn't come back the same way. If any part of this stayed with you, I'll be here next time. I remember the exact moment I realized I had made a mistake. Not when I signed the papers, not when the money left my account, but the first night I needed permission to turn on a light. If this feels familiar, consider subscribing. It sounds small, doesn't it? A light switch. Something you don't even think about when you live in your own home. But that evening, I was sitting in my son's living room, the house already dim, and I reached for the lamp beside me. And I hesitated, because earlier that week he had said, "Mom, we're trying to keep the electricity bill down." He didn't mean anything cruel by it. It was just a comment, practical, reasonable. But my hand stopped in midair, and I thought, this isn't my house anymore. That's how it begins, not with big betrayals, but with small permissions. At first, I told myself I was adjusting. Anyone would need time, new space, new routines. I was grateful, I really was. They had opened their home to me, that mattered. But gratitude, when it stretches too far, starts to feel like silence. I stopped making suggestions, stopped moving things, stopped asking for anything that wasn't absolutely necessary, because every request, no matter how small, reminded me of something I didn't want to name. I no longer had a place that answered to me. I had always been careful with money, my whole life, raised that way. You save, you plan, you prepare for the years when you can't start over. And yet, I undid all of that in one decision that felt like love. I sold the house for a good price, divided the money carefully, helped both of my children in ways that looked generous on paper, and for a moment, I felt proud, like I had done something meaningful. But what I didn't calculate was what it would cost me to no longer have a door I could close behind me. Days began to take on a rhythm that wasn't mine. They left early. I stayed behind. I would clean up, not because they asked me to, but because I needed to justify my presence somehow, to earn the space I was taking up. I folded laundry that wasn't mine, washed dishes I didn't use, kept things in order, quietly. No one told me to do it, but I knew what it meant to live in someone else's home. You make yourself useful, or you start to feel like you shouldn't be there. And then came the small shifts. Plans made without me, weekends where they were busy, evenings where I sat alone in a room that held no part of my life. I wasn't unwelcome. That's what made it harder to explain. I was simply not essential. If you're still here, you already understand that feeling. One Sunday, they had guests over, friends. Laughter filled the house in a way that almost felt familiar. I came out of my room thinking I might sit with them for a while, but my son said gently, "Mom, we're just catching up with friends tonight." Just that, nothing sharp, nothing unkind, And yet, I went back to my room and closed the door, and something inside me closed with it. That was the moment I saw it clearly. I had stepped out of my own life and into the edges of theirs. That realization doesn't come with noise. It comes quietly, like something settling where it always belonged. The nights became longer after that. I started staying in my room more, not because anyone told me to, but because it felt easier, safer, less noticeable. I would sit by the window sometimes, watching the street, thinking about my old house, the way the light fell across the kitchen table in the morning, the sound of the floor in the hallway, the feeling of walking into a space where everything belonged to me. Not expensive, not perfect, but mine. That word, it changes meaning when you lose it. Mine isn't about ownership, it's about certainty. And I had traded that certainty for something I couldn't hold on to. One evening, I heard my son and his wife talking in the kitchen. They weren't arguing, just discussing things, budgets, space, plans. And then I heard my name, quiet, careful. We just need to figure out what makes sense long term. That sentence stayed with me because I understood it immediately. I wasn't part of something permanent. I was something to figure out. That's the bottom people don't talk about. Not abandonment, not cruelty, just being the problem that needs solving. And the hardest part? They weren't wrong. That's what I had made myself into, without meaning to. It took me a long time to face that truth without breaking under it. But once I did, something shifted. Not outside, inside. I stopped asking how long I could stay and started asking a different question. How do I get myself back? Not the house, that was gone, but the part of me that had choices, the part that didn't wait for someone else's schedule to feel settled, the part that could sit in a room and not feel like a guest in her own life. It wasn't easy. At my age, starting over doesn't look like it does in movies. There's no dramatic turning point, just small decisions, quiet ones. I began setting aside what little I had left, looking at options, asking questions I should have asked before I signed those papers. And slowly, very slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in months, a sense that I might still have a say. Not a big one, but enough. Because here's what I understand now, in a way I never did before. When you give your children everything, without leaving something for yourself, you don't become closer to them, you become dependent on them. And dependence, even when it's wrapped in love, changes the balance in ways that are very hard to undo. I still love my children. That never changed. But I see now that love without boundaries doesn't protect anyone. It erodes, quietly, patiently, until one day you wake up and realize you've given away the very ground you needed to stand on. If any part of this stayed with you, I'll be here next time. I thought losing my home was the hardest part. But I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing I had nowhere left to return to. If you've ever confused love with sacrifice, stay with me. After a while, something changes inside you when you live in someone else's space, not all at once, not in a way you can point to and say, there it is. It's quieter than that. You begin to shrink, not physically, but in all the ways that matter. Your voice softens, your opinions stay unspoken. Your needs get postponed. I started noticing it in the smallest moments. I would wait to use the kitchen until no one else was there. I would turn the television off if someone walked in. I would apologize for things that didn't require an apology. Sorry, I didn't know you needed this room. Sorry, I'll just move. Sorry. That word became a habit, not because anyone demanded it, but because I no longer felt like I had a right to simply exist. Without explanation. Mornings were the hardest. I used to wake up in my own bedroom, sunlight falling exactly where I expected it. I knew every sound, every corner, every rhythm of that house. Now, I woke up disoriented. Different ceiling, different light, different life. And for a few seconds each morning, I forgot. I forgot that I had sold my home, forgot that everything I built had been turned into something I no longer controlled. and then it would come back. Slow, heavy, unavoidable. If you're still here, I think you understand that kind of waking up. One afternoon, I tried to make something familiar. Soup. The kind I used to cook when the children were small. The smell alone used to bring them into the kitchen before I even called them. I stood there, stirring the pot, waiting for that feeling to return, but it didn't, because it wasn't my kitchen. And memories, they don't settle the same way in borrowed spaces. My daughter-in-law walked in, smiled politely, and said, "Oh, you didn't have to cook." Didn't have to. Such a simple phrase, but it landed in a place I wasn't prepared for, because I wasn't trying to help. I was trying to feel like I still belonged somewhere. That was the day I stopped trying to recreate the past and started seeing the present for what it was, a life I was living without roots. The breaking point didn't come with shouting, it came with a calendar. They were planning something, a trip, I think, talking about dates, schedules, logistics, and then my son said, casually, "We just need to figure out what to do with Mom while we're gone." While we're gone, not where I would like to be, not what I might want, what to do with me. Like I was something that needed placing, managing, solving. That sentence, it didn't echo. It settled, right there in my chest. And for the first time, I didn't feel sad. I felt clear. Because there it was, plain and simple. I had given away my independence, and in return, I had become a responsibility, not a partner in my own life, not even a guest anymore. Something in between, something temporary, something uncertain. That was the moment everything inside me shifted. No anger, no tears, just understanding. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. And I asked myself a question I had been avoiding since the day I sold my house. What have I done to myself? Not what they did, not what happened, what I allowed, what I chose, and why. The answer wasn't complicated. It was love, but not the kind of love people like to talk about. Not warm, not balanced, the kind that gives because it's afraid not to, the kind that says yes because no feels like loss, the kind that slowly empties you while convincing you it's the right thing to do. I had lived my whole life being needed, wife, mother, provider, and when that role started to fade, I replaced it the only way I knew how. I gave more, bigger, until there was nothing left that was mine alone. That night, I didn't sleep much, but something important happened in that quiet. I stopped waiting for things to feel normal again, because they wouldn't, not like this, and instead, I made a decision, a quiet one, the kind no one else hears. I decided I would not spend the rest of my life like this, not dependent, not uncertain, not asking where I belong, even if it meant starting over at an age where most people are letting go, even if it was small, even if it was hard. Because here's the truth I came to understand, too late but still in time. Independence is not about comfort. It's about dignity. It's about knowing that your life still answers to you. And when you lose that, you feel it in every corner of your days. I didn't know exactly how I would fix it, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never again give away the last piece of ground that held me up. Because love, real love, doesn't ask you to disappear. And if any part of this stayed with you, subscribe. Not for me, for the part of you that needed to hear this.